This Werewolves YouTube channel, a video companion to our weekly horror podcast. If you like horror and you like podcasts, you might like us. Links are down below. Please check us out. My name is David, and I know what you're thinking. Is that a My Pet Monster? It is. But today, we're going to talk about my new pet monster, the Apprehension Engine. So, just a quick history lesson. If you like horror scores to movies, particularly the films The Witch and The Lighthouse, both of those films were scored by a man named Mark Korven. Now, Mark Korven was kind of sick of the conventional, kind of stereotypical horror music, so he reached out to a man named Tony Duggan-Smith, who's a guitar maker, and challenged him to make an instrument that kind of just creates unique sounds, and this was sort of what he came up with. Now, you can buy these online directly through Tony Duggan-Smith. They are a little pricey. However, there's a man named Michael Freudenberg. He has a YouTube channel that I'll link down below called Film Masters. He put out a 30-chapter series on how to build your own Apprehension Engine. So that's what I did. So with the help of my dad, we spent about 30 hours building this thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go through and walk you sound by sound of what this can do. And then I'll set up a tripod and kind of do a whole bunch of shit and kind of show you a little more context of what this thing's capable of doing. So, more to come. All right, here is the Apprehension Engine up close and personal. Before I play anything, I know some people care about this stuff as far as gear goes. Everything that you're about to hear, I'm running through a Yamaha MG10XU mixer with just a little bit of reverb as far as like an effect goes. It is going into a Line 6 half stack with basically just the clean channel with some reverb added. And that's it. So I'm going to go pretty simple. Well, I am going to use, a little later, I'll use this Electro-Harmonic 720. That's a looping pedal. So I'll do that just so I can kind of loop something and then play stuff over it. That's a rum and coke. It just makes everything sound better. As far as the features itself, we've got a HurdyGurdy wheel here. Basically how this works is you're going to crank this little handle. The friction of the strings rubbing against the wheel creates a droning type sound. It's very cool. These are rulers that you can either play by plucking or hitting, or you can also use a bow. And I've actually got a bow over here, so I'll show you that as well. This is an E-bow. And it is used often on guitars, and it's basically just magnetically moves the strings and kind of acts as an electronic bow. This second neck that you see here, you can use either violin or guitar strings. I believe I used guitar strings, and there's a humbucker pickup. This right here is the Reverb Tank. And then on top of the box, we've got a couple of metal rods that you can play by just kind of pulling up and just letting them kind of clank against the box. This is a saw blade that we just kind of coiled up, and I'll show you a couple things you can do with that. And then a chain wrapped around the top for making more kind of clangy sounds. So let's get into it and kind of walk step by step through what each of these features does. Okay, so for the HurdyGurdy wheel, what you're going to do is you're going to crank this wheel here, and the friction of the strings rubbing over the wheel creates sort of a droning sound. So if you crank, it sounds like this. Now you can create alternate pitches by kind of resting your finger just barely on the string. It's a little higher now. You can get some really cool sounds out of that. All right, now the rulers, you can play a few different ways, and you can kind of tune them basically by how short or long you make each ruler. This is kind of the configuration that I've sort of settled on. But you can play a few different ways. You can just pluck them. And it'll kind of produce tones that way. You can also use a bow, which is kind of cool. So here's a little bow. So depending on where you kind of strike it or bow it from, it'll produce different tones. All right, next up we got the smaller neck, which is the one that have guitar strings on. You can tune it however you want. To be honest with you, it's not in tune right now, but you can play it by plucking the strings that way. You can also use a bow. So for example, here's bowing all 3 strings at the same time. You could also bow single strings. Or you can also use the E-bow to generate some droning sounds. We also have the Reverb Tank, which is this area here. You can play it a couple of different ways as well. One simple way is you can just flick the springs with your finger. It creates kind of a low end kind of rumble. You can also use the E-bow and sort of punch it up against the springs. Make some cool noises that way. Now if we go up top, one feature you'll see here are these metal rods, which kind of create like a clacking kind of sound. Now I've got 2 different thicknesses, so they'll produce slightly different sounds. So let's do the thicker one and the thinner one. So sort of some cool rattling features. Now if you look over here, we've got a saw blade. Saw blade, you can kind of just pluck, creates a little bit of a rattle. One thing I like doing is if you take a mallet and just turn it backwards, kind of make some clacking sounds that way. You can also run it against the blade itself. Has some cool kind of scratchy sounds. And then I also have a chain. A chain, you just kind of rattle, just like a regular chain. And just create, some of those kind of ambient, sort of haunted house kind of sounds. All right, last thing I want to show you before we start jamming on this thing is another feature that is actually probably the simplest. I didn't mention this earlier, but the Apprehension Engine, part of what picks up the sound is there are several pickups that are inside of it. And in fact, you can even, if I knock on it, it kind of picks up the sound, even if I bang on the front of it. Now, these are called friction mallets. So if you take a mallet and just rub it against the wood, it'll generate a sound. So for example, if we go with the thickest one, it'll generate a tone that is kind of deep sounding. So here you go. Let's go the other way. Now the camera probably won't pick this up, but I'll rub it against the front of the engine. It picks up sound there as well. Now if we go with a smaller mallet, so let's go with the medium-sized one. Now we should hear a tone that's a little bit higher. We do. And I've had a lot of fun just kind of generating sounds with that as well. All right, so let's turn the lights down and I'll show you kind of a little bit of everything at once. I'll get the looping pedal out, so I'll probably get a hurdy-gurdy drone going, and then we'll throw some stuff on top of it. Real quick and easy. It might sound great, might sound stupid, but that's kind of the fun of this whole thing. It's just experimenting and coming up with new textures and tones. So here we go. All right, here we go. that's it. So that is the Apprehension Engine. Big shout out to Michael Freudenberg for all of his help in getting this thing built. Like I mentioned earlier, please be sure to check out his YouTube channel, Film Masters. The link is in the description. I also want to give a big shout out to my dad for all of his help in getting this built. Would not have been possible without either of those gentlemen, so thank you very, very much. If you'd like to hear this instrument in a different context, I'm going to give a shameless plug for myself. I did do a soundtrack slash score to the Swearwolves podcast, and the Apprehension Engine is featured on, I believe, 3 different tracks. So if you'd like to hear it in a different context, alongside drums, bass, guitars, and synths, please check that out. You can find that on any major music streaming service. Just search either the Swearwolves or Aaron Moya and David Thompson. That is me. Also, if you like this video, please like and consider subscribing. And until next time, for the Swearwolves, I'm David.